moving on, we have panel discussion now on vibe coding. Um, I would like to call the panelists Anirudh, Anandita, Anand S, Shreya, and Anand. So please have a round of applause and welcome the panelists.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Uh, and welcome to all the panelists as well. How many of you know what vibe coding is? Okay. How many of you do vibe code? All right. So today's panel is about vibe coding, and the idea is to figure out if how cool is it, how important it is, how integrated it is with today's ecosystem, and probably something around the models that we use to vibe code, what's better, what's not, and we'll get to hear some experiences from all of the panelists. We'll start with a quick introduction from everyone about, let's say, what you do, what's your experience around LLMs today, and a little bit about your experience with vibe coding as well. Let's start here.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Shreya. I'm an AI developer. I work at Zikhara. I have vibe coded my way into this career, so I should be the biggest proponent here. I have used vibe coding because my educational background is in natural sciences, which is physics. So I've used ChatGPT a lot to learn concepts and to build faster. I love building. That is the reason I got into this field, and I've used vibe coding to sort of build structure and then get into depths of how to sort of bring them together to make it work.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, my name is Anindita. So I have more than a decade of experience total into AI NLP. So I started my career as an NLP researcher, and I belong to the pre-ChatGPT research area where we could not prototype solutions so fast. We had to do a lot of thinking and then design our solutions and do everything step by step. So it started with, if you know certain algorithms like word to wake, then BERT, then transformer. So I have seen that entire transformation happening. And then after the ChatGPT era, my experience with vibe coding has been like, if you want to prototype something very quickly, it's very good. And if you have some UI element to it, it works pretty well. But as soon as you add some more complexity to it, and you are not somebody who has very good foundations architecturing software, you are going to face problems. So to sum it up, that is my thought on vibe coding so far. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm Anand. I research LLMs at Strive. I must differentiate between vibe coding and AI coding. AI coding is where you use AI to code. Vibe coding is where you code like the code doesn't even exist. You don't even look at the code. And that can be powerful, particularly for non-developers. If you don't know how to code, this is an entry point. And therefore, we must differentiate between people who know how to code, who are vibe coding, versus those who don't, because for the latter, there is no alternative, and therefore becomes a fantastically powerful tool. For developers, it is particularly useful for prototyping, stuff that you build and throw away. Because if it works, fine, who cares about the code? If it does not work, then I suggest dropping it. Or maybe try once or twice, but if it doesn't work after once or twice, try something else. Or try a few months later when the models become better. And therefore, don't commit based on your ability to vibe code, because you never know what will succeed and fail. And keeping these caveats in mind, even for developers, it's a great technique.
Yeah. I'm Anand, one more Anand. So I've been building software for more than 2 decades now, and I've also been teaching Python, other technologies for more than a decade and a half. I find the new AI assisted coding kind of quite interesting. Like Anand said, like I also kind of distinguish quite between what people call vibe coding and actually AI assisted coding. I think Anand said pretty much the difference between those two. I mean, I feel vibe coding as a term used like you don't care about the code is quite powerful. While being a developer, I find quite handicapped to do the vibe coding because the moment the tool starts generating code, I would kind of look at the code and see is the quality good or not, right? I mean, that's so in a sense like I'm handicapped to kind of really do vibe coding the right way. But having said that, I kind of see it as a powerful tool where people who have expertise in other domains earlier who were kind of really handicapped because of lack of expertise in writing code, they would depend on people in other teams, etc., and kind of wait for months and weeks to get that in the priority. Now they can actually do things on their own, or at least build a prototype and actually share it to other people, etc. Uh, but on the other hand, look at AI-assisted coding. I think it's very interesting because it kind of improves your productivity. You don't really have to now think at the code level, but actually look at architecture level and etc. But at the same time, I kind of worry a little bit about how it's going to actually affect learning and people coming to new programming, etc. I think more can come when it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned that you have vibe coded before. Have any of you, other of you, have vibe coded so far? Tried it out?
Yes.
Absolutely. What are the general tools that you usually prefer for that?
So I've been using Cursor a lot
Cursor,
lately.
all right.
So I find it pretty good because you also have that agent mode facility. So it's like when you use something like ChatGPT, so it's like one shot kind of code generating your AI code. But vibe coding is more like you have a, you're co-programming with someone. So the faster you think, faster you code. So which is good, but the only ethical risk is I feel is that it maybe gives you a false sense of confidence that you have developed an app, whereas you have not really developed it. The entire agent has done it for you. So that is the ethical thing. And the other problem which I see is around observability, because the agent does very good coding. We also have this option in Cursor which select different models, GPT-5, Claude, which are very good. But we still don't have that capability today where we can trace back the decisions of the agent, like why it made a certain decision, why you are using certain design practices in your code. So if you are a beginner or you don't know too much about your core software engineering principles, you're going to mess it up at the end. So I think that is important.
And do you question that? Like, let's say you ask it to design a particular project and it figured out some architecture. Do you go back and question it? Why did you think about it this way? Or do you look at the reasoning that the model went through while creating that sort of structure?
Yeah, I did try to prompt it, but I think observability wise, we still have not reached that level of sophistication where
All right.
the agent can, properly trace back why it made that decision. Of course, it can be inputted into a feedback loop. Like, suppose we have certain errors, so instead of fixing it manually, if we know it, we can prompt it back. And we can also save those prompts in Composer, and that can be used to retrain the model. I think that is one way.
That's a good segue from the education perspective as well. How do you think that it has affected the learning process of the new developers, people who are studying right now, and then people who are just joining new companies as beginners?
So I don't really have much experience uh, working with people who have come to, young developers these days. But given the background in teaching and also the way I kind of working with these tools, so one thing I feel is these tools kind of give quite a bit of leverage once you have that expertise. Okay, for example, when I actually work with an LLM, I actually speak at the level of architecture, and I talk about how should I structure this module, single responsibility principle, and then dividing an interface so that it has minimal components and all of that, right? And when it kind of suggests an approach, then I kind of question it, saying that does it actually meet all these criteria or etc. Right? In a sense, it's almost like a buddy with whom I can actually discuss about architecture and design, etc. Right? Okay. And once I kind of satisfied with that, I would ask it to kind of implement code. I feel like I have the responsibility of whatever I'm developing, even though I'm kind of using all of these tools, right? Okay. Now, what I feel is, at least since I've learned all these techniques the hard way, I have an advantage because now I can understand these things and kind of build better code. Now, what I really worry is like when young developers come in and then they don't really have a chance of making mistakes, or they don't even care because the code is coming. Okay, I really worry how would actually they develop a taste for what is good quality code. So that's kind of a worry.
And that's, yeah, please.
Uh, One of the things that we are considering is vibe evaluation. Meaning, when teaching, let's use LLMs to evaluate. One of the things we are doing at IIT Madras right now is there is a course, Modern Application Development. Students submit projects. We now run a Viva, where the code base, which is uploaded, whose GitHub link is sent to the LLM, is evaluated by Gemini. It goes through the whole thing, or no, sorry, I think GPT-5 Mini, and it comes up with a set of questions. Vibe. Now we are vibe everything, and the student then has to answer, maybe answer, do what they want, but that is transcribed and we evaluate against the code base. It also suggests some changes that the student has to make in the code, partly to test if they really made wrote the code or someone else wrote it for them, also to test their understanding of some of the concepts. They have to make the change. Then we vibe write the code to evaluate the change to see if it is actually working. So in short, I think it works both ways. We are able to improve the code that we write, but also improve our learning using the same techniques maybe.
But now the teacher is LLM, the student is LLM, the examiner is LLM, and probably the judge is also LLM.
Yeah. Let's watch Netflix.
Too many LLM vibes.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you seen, like, from a research perspective, have you seen the LLMs evolve to go to that way where now we have like very proper eval setup, we have very nice judge LLMs set up and so on. Have you seen the models go through?
Yeah, so for my recent research on AI governance, I use something called as Deep Eval by Confident AI. So I think it has evolved pretty well. But in very layman terms, if I have to tell you, LLM will always assume a best case scenario. In terms of coding, also, it will not cover all your test cases. So this testing is still little more human dependent. If you're a developer, so you have to code as well as you have to test more. So commit more, test more, and that's how I think it can be improved more.
Yeah, absolutely. And how have you like sort of got involved with, like, do you first approach it from your perspective, or do you have very specific instructions for it that I want this?
Yeah. So LLMs, the problem with LLMs is it's very generic. So I usually start with having a document of what I want, and I'll like in simple natural language I'll write down what I want, and then I use I'll create a project. You can create a project in GPT-5, and then you can add all the context you want. Once I've written down what I want, then I'll ask it what it thinks is the best way to do this. Once it gives me an answer, I'll ask it what sort of limitations can you see, and then I'll go and do research on that by myself, read documentation, all of that, and then I'll go back. It's sort of a conversation where you get better and better. And with the learning point that he mentioned, how do you sort of get to the point where you learn? I feel like so many times my code has just broken, and at that point LLMs don't help. A lot of times they don't help. I'm just going through YouTube videos, documentation. That's how I learned.
Yeah, I agree on this. I mean, if your chat gets too long, so it forgets.
Yeah.
And it reaches, it'll a certain point it'll do good, then it'll forget. And
Please
it'll
and
hallucinate
yeah,
badly.
please start a new chat.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what?
I got it multiple times too, completely.
So I want to add something to it. So there's a quote by, I think, Brian Kernighan. It's talking about coding style and all of that. Okay, it's something like this. Don't use all your smartness in actually coding, because debugging is double as hard as writing code. So if you use all your smartness to write code, then by definition, you're not smart enough to debug that. Okay. Now, if I kind of take that into the LLMs, you're basically not using your smartness at all. The LLM is kind of generating the code. Okay. Now, the hard part is now how are you going to debug it? Okay. So the LLM is using all its smartness to generate the code. Now you need double the smartness to debug it. So you're pretty much handicapped to kind of do it now.
Essentially, still with a lot of these issues, do you find that it's very attractive to still go and vibe code something in the middle of the night? You have an idea, like, okay, let me just see how it looks like.
Absolutely, it's very attractive to get started something because I work at a startup, so usually my boss will have an idea, and then I need to give him a solution. It'll just take me 2-3 hours to just sit in sort of vibe code, and I'll have a solution, and then we'll discuss without a chat GPT.
Which essentially, like a POC would have taken probably a week or 2 weeks, and can now be just shown in a matter of hours or something like that. What do you think actually makes it like that attractive? Is the speed of the speed of generation of it, the accuracy of it, something new that it brings up to you?
I would say mentorship, sort of guiding you. I think that guidance helps me a lot. Not speed. Speed is there, but like a knowledge base that I can reach out to, ask very stupid questions. So the ability to ask stupid questions without having to be guilted.
Okay.
So earlier what used to happen is like you have to know certain, you have to be good in data structures, you have to optimize your loops properly, you have to think line by line. So at least if you're not an expert programmer, but you have ideas, if you have domain knowledge, at least you can, if you have an idea, you can bring that to, minimum viable product or POC level. But yeah, again, bringing it to the enterprise level is still a challenge. So it is attractive, but it's still a long way to go is what I feel.
And from a building software perspective, let's say earlier we used to go to Stack Overflow, documentation, and so on. Now, essentially, I have not opened Stack Overflow in a long time. I just go to ChatGPT or Claude or something and just ask the questions, and it gives me the links of Stack Overflow as well. How do you think it has gone on from like software development from this side to entirely dependent on ChatGPTs and other LLMs?
I think few years back, seniors used to also look up Stack Overflow. I mean, I know a few devs who had all these things pasted in their repository. There's copy and paste it. I mean, boilerplates are boring for senior devs. I can imagine.
Yeah, I remember as a junior, I used to run to my senior, and he always had the bookmark list of Stack Overflow articles, which you cannot understand once by reading.
Do you feel it has like grown on to become better in terms of the development process, or like?
Definitely. I mean, with
Definitely.
Perplexity, I mean, it lists you everything, detailed search, you have this deep search thing. So even if your LLM is hallucinating, you can at least trace back as a human, and you can yourself give it better feedback, give it more clear prompts, because the non-vibing happens when your prompt is not clear.
I think we're coming back to, let's say, better prompts. And in that way, I mean, if you're vibe coded something a year ago and you're vibe coding today, the results are vastly different, right?
Vastly different.
In terms of evolution of models in that way, what changes in particular has happened from a technical perspective that you have seen as a researcher?
Context length?
Yeah, context length. Yeah,
2023 was really bad.
yeah. It's the free version of ChatGPT
Yeah.
was horrible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Instruction following in the OpenAI models, notably GPT-5.
Instruction following.
And
Okay.
a little too rigid, in fact. So now I have to be very careful. Earlier, I used to say always write tests. Then I started saying write tests. Now I'm saying write tests if the tests already exist, because otherwise it insists on following my instructions perfectly. In the Anthropic models, taste. Claude continues to evolve in terms of UI taste in particular. The ways in which they are using tool calling have also dramatically improved. But personally, I think the bulk of the improvement has been on the tool side themselves, Cloud Code and Codex CLI, as robust command line alternatives to the likes of Cursor, GitHub Copilot, Windsurf, etc., have made a huge difference, especially with their ability to, for instance, run shell scripts, use GHCLI, and a whole bunch of other things.
From an interface perspective, what's more attractive? Like, is it like a web UI? Is it the CLI? Is it an editor? What would you prefer more?
I would personally prefer web UI more because in Cursor you don't have to do those manual steps like creating environment and all that. You just prompt it and your entire setup is done very fast.
But essentially, like if you're working locally and then you have to like probably either copy paste things or from there, right? In a web UI mode.
Uh, I I prefer that because it gives me control a little bit. I'm
Okay.
reading and I'm copy pasting, and I have to go to the exact file and paste it. Sort of a slower learning process. Editor is also good, but it's very fast. It's too fast for my learning.
Okay. All right.
Another thing is these reasoning things, like we have this ChatGPT 5 thinking, right? So although it's slow, but for more complex things it is required, which we didn't have earlier.
I kind of find the other way. I find Cloud Code work in the terminal kind of a lot more comfortable for my taste. I mean, I use Cursor and Cloud both, but I actually like the Cloud Code because it is running the terminal, so it has access to shell commands much easier than actually the other way. Also, I find it the kind of two modes, planning mode and execution mode, different. So I'm in a plan mode and kind of discuss and can brainstorm ideas. And then once I'm okay with the plan, I can go ahead and implement. It can actually run the shell commands pretty easily right there. It has more access to that than what you kind of find in the editor. But I also like the editor interface when I want to actually do it myself, because the autocomplete is kind of sometimes helpful, because when you're working in other language, for example, sometimes I work in Go, for example, the error handling, you have to check, and so it can a lot of boilerplate, and I don't want to write all of that. So the moment I start writing it, it can auto-completes it, and then I make one change, small refactoring, it automatically goes to next and does all of that. I find it kind of quite productive to do it. I use the web interface only when I just want to kind of think about ideas, or when I'm on my phone or something. But generally, when I'm developing, I prefer working with close to terminal as much as possible.
And I'm probably the only one who strongly prefers the web interface. I find that it's the only one that I can use while I'm walking. This morning I was walking and needed a tool that can do voice transcription. So I just coded it. It's done. I'll probably merge it later. Otherwise, terminal works well. Cloud Code on the CLI for UI. GitHub Copilot because it's free for my students.
Amazing. And have you essentially got into sort of a loop where you are asking something, it's giving you something, and then again you get into this vibe loop kind of situation?
Yes, it does happen.
What do you-
Especially if your prompts are not very clear and you yourself don't know what is your end goal properly. Your idea is not clear in your head and you are not thinking from a software architect kind of view, right? So ideas will range from somebody who's too junior to too senior. But if you don't know how software applications are built, you will definitely non-vibe with that.
What do you do to get out of that situation?
So I think one way is to design better prompts, the simplest way, because I think your prompt and the way you're providing it context is very important. Provide it accurate, concise, to the point examples. The another way is to adjust the temperature settings.
The first, I think, is really important. The speed at which it codes is much faster than the speed at which I review, like order of 10x magnitude. So the more I have to review, the more a waste of time it is. So I did a postmortem, took about 11 conversations in Codex, and took the entire transcript and sent it to ChatGPT and said, why did these conversations or iterations all take, or why did these all take more than 10 iterations? The top two problems for me, at least, were one, clarity on UI. I said, okay, now change this button, now change this text box, now change this. And therefore, if I could have prototyped the UI separately and gotten more clarity on what I wanted, better prompting, as you said, that would make a difference. The second thing is it messed up the test environment and therefore couldn't run the automated tests that I told it to. Therefore, get the test set up right. I'm not following this advice still, but better prompting helps, but this post-mortem, which we do with human developers, works well with LLMs as well.
That's interesting. But so one thing that I find making mistakes and kind of iteration and kind of getting in the loops is common, not only when you're kind of not thinking architecture, but even when you're kind of seriously looking at architecture. Uh, let's say you start with a problem and then it tells you some solution, then you kind of point like, see, you haven't considered this. And then, okay, let me revise that. It kind of does it. And then it goes for 2-3 loops and kind of, when you get the final one, the first one I kind of thought, it kind of completely forgot, right? Okay. So then you have to kind of stop everything and kind of put all the 4 points and kind of make a better prompt and do it. That works, okay. Another problem is like, there are, one thing that I find is like these LLMs are good at some kind of tools. For example, it's really productive working with React and Tailwind, for example. Okay, I'm a kind of old schooler, like semantic CSS, and these are tools that I generally kind of don't like, and I prefer to kind of do static pages, etc. For example, when I want to build a website, I prefer to use something like a Quarto or something and make a static thing. It's terrible at working at that, and I probably have to kind of actually make a React in Tailwind and actually then ask it, can you kind of convert this to this? Then it kind of works. When working with little infrastructure kind of things, for example, Terraform kind of things, its scariest passive effect hallucinates and kind of makes a mistake. A part of an application is not accessible by the network. It's really hard to find out. You can't really ask it to write a test case and figure out, right? So this is, it happens and really scary because you can't just rely on LLM to kind of generate some code. It works fine if it's just a front end because I can actually see it and figure out, but I'm working with Terraform or kind of doing an infrastructure in AWS, especially when you're not writing one time off code, but you actually want to maintain for the long term, it really gets scary.
Yeah.
I relate to that Tailwind example. It has a bias, and I've learned that I didn't know how to make front end, but I've learned that now. I was not given a choice.
Another pain point I see is I don't know how it will be solved, but like we have CI/CD pipelines, we maintain our code, we maintain certain code templates. So many times while learning, especially designing something complex, we also know how to prompt better. So we can save those as like we save chats. So similar to that, maybe we can save them as prompt templates. So that how we'll reuse is I think we still have some way to go ahead.
Absolutely.
Can I add something to that? So one thing is like for 2 decades, we've been trained ourselves to kind of how to write better code, how to organize projects. So you have issues and you have code and write comments, etc. Now we have a new system where the code that you're writing is not the first source of truth, right? The first source of truth is the prompt that you're given, and that's not part of the repository, right? Okay. Now we're kind of going back. It kind of feels like a step backward where you're not really committing the most important part of it in the repository. Okay. Now I feel like we haven't even figured it out what's the right way of kind of organizing it. I think we'll probably learn it over time, or maybe have any.
Maintain commit an agents.md which symlinks to cloud.md in each repository. Maintain a prompts.md or spec.md which has the history of all of your prompts. You may want to have this in each of your folders. Be careful to make sure that this is not outdated, because if it is, then the future LLMs will pick it up for context. If something is transient, instead put it in the git commit history, and that will not interfere with the main stuff. Use LLMs to generate the git commit as well. So you have 2 parts. One, what it said, as well as what you asked for. Allow access to tools, specifically GH, for it, or Git at the very least, for it to be able to access the history for additional context as required, and prompt it in your agents.md saying that this is, if you want to know why I did something like this, then access is available either in spec.md or prompts.md on the one hand, which is static, as well as the Git history. Finally, periodically review this and push all of this into an architecture.md, which it can use for long-term decisions. This is a summary of what I've learned.
That's great suggestions. We have a couple of more questions, but if you have anybody wants to ask questions to our panelists, please have your questions prepared. At any given point in this conversation, did you feel like this is something that I should chat GPT? Is that what you're doing? All right. If you have to give like one advice for people to actually do vibe coding, or from AI coding perspective, I mean, those were some solid advices from managing the code base. how would you, what would you say for responsible vibe coding? We can start here.
Mm, I would say know what you want. That's the best step you can take, because like she said, we'll just get into loops if you don't know what you want. So that's my advice.
Great.
I have a very simple, basic advice. Many of us work with enterprise data, right? So we have many configuration env files which has all our keys and all. So don't put it into your repository, because unknowingly it may connect it to some hashy vault or something, and it may cause serious troubles. The another thing is, commit more often. And like I mentioned earlier, LLM will never look at all the possible corner cases. So that debugging often and, properly maintaining your code is also very important.
Absolutely.
Generate tests first and make sure that the number of lines of code in the tests are 2x the lines of code of proper code.
I just want to comment something on the writing tests. So, I mean, somehow, when LLM generate code tests, first thing I do is actually look at the test and look at the test quality. Okay, I'm somehow kind of wired to kind of do all of that. I feel it's too verbose. Then I kind of went in the loop saying that, okay, no, what happens is actually when it generates two verbose codes over time, the test becomes unmaintainable. So not sure what the solution is, okay, but yeah. So coming to the question, right? I kind of somehow don't really like the term vibe coding, because it kind of, you're asking like, how to do responsible vibe coding? For me, it feels like when you say vibe coding, you're not responsible. You just want to generate some code and throw it off, right? Okay. So in that sense, there are a lot of times where you don't really care about the code, but you want to quickly prototype something and then take it to the meeting and saying that this is how you're going to build an application, or do you think this is what you have in mind, etc. It's perfectly fine. You don't have to think about it, okay? But whereas when you're actually building software, you want to maintain and you want to kind of be responsible for it and kind of looking at a longer horizon, I think then you have to start thinking about not the code, but actually a level higher, look at architecture, and then is it maintainable? If it's writing test cases, can I maintain these tests for any year, right? I think those are things that you have to keep in mind while doing it.
All right, great. Do we have time for questions? Okay, anybody has any questions? Yeah, let's go there. There's a mic over there. I think you have to just queue up.
Okay, we'll repeat the question. You're close enough. Not exactly vibe coding. This is where you're using, sorry, the question is how do we bring in determinism when LLMs are non-deterministic? Given that this is about vibe coding and that question was more about LLMs, broadly say the easiest approach is to instead use code. So don't use an LLM to provide the answer, use code to provide the answer. You can use an LLM to create the code if you want.
But then it might, so essentially if you say that it's a database, then the code is an SQL statement that you're running on it. And if you have an LLM generate that SQL, it just wildly hallucinates like tables and all of that.
Question was, but then if the LLM generates the SQL, then it can still wildly hallucinate. Exactly. So if you want determinism, drop the LLM in the generation part. Code has to generate it.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah.
I have a question. We do a lot of vibe coding, but the biggest risk is around intellectual property and licensing. If we try to use it in enterprise setup, we don't know what code we are putting. Is this, can it be even put? And if we contribute using that vibe coding for open source, again, that dilemma comes in.
Google and Microsoft provide a guarantee to their paying clients saying that if somebody sues you, we'll fight your cases for you. That works for most enterprises. I don't know about open source.
All right. I think we'll have that's all for the questions. Thank you all for joining the sessions, and thank you for panelists for